She never said a word back to them. She just smiled, put her headset back on, and waited. Because in about 4 minutes, 3 F-18 pilots were going to land on that runway, and every single one of them was going to need her permission first. Good evening. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. After 28 years in the skies, I thought I'd seen every kind of pilot walk across a runway. I was wrong. Tonight, let me tell you what happened at Naval Air Station Meridian, and how a woman a tour group laughed at for looking too young to be there ended up holding the fate of 3 fighter jets in the palm of her hand. Stay with me on this one, because the ending is worth every second of the wait. And if these stories mean something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe before we get into it, because there's always another flight worth telling. Lieutenant Commander Zoe Bennett stood near the edge of the active runway that afternoon, a headset draped around her neck, a clipboard tucked under one arm, dressed in a plain flight suit with her hair pulled back in a simple braid. She was 30 years old, though most people guessed younger, and she'd spent the better part of the last decade proving over and over that the guests didn't matter nearly as much as the people making it seem to think it did. It was a public visitor day at the base, families walking a roped-off viewing path near the flight line, a tour guide leading a cluster of civilians past the operations building toward the observation area. The guide, a retired petty officer named Frank Dolan doing the tour circuit part-time, gestured toward Zoe as the group passed. "That young lady there," he said, chuckling, "she's probably an intern, maybe a student pilot's girlfriend tagging along for the show. They don't let anybody that young actually run anything out here." A few people in the group laughed politely, one mother pulling out her phone to snap a photo of the runway, uninterested in Zoe beyond the passing joke. Zoe heard every word of it, the sound carrying easily across the open tarmac the way certain comments always seem to, no matter the distance. She didn't turn around. She adjusted her headset, checked the wind reading on her handheld instrument, and smiled slightly to herself, not out of bitterness, just the quiet amusement of someone who'd heard 100 versions of that same guess over the years and had long since stopped needing to correct any of them. What Frank Dolan and that tour group didn't know was that Zoe Bennett wasn't a student, an intern, or anybody's girlfriend tagging along for a good view. She was the squadron's landing signal officer, one of the most demanding and respected positions in naval aviation, responsible for grading and, when necessary, waving off every single carrier qualification landing pass the incoming F-18s were about to attempt that afternoon. Her word, in the next few minutes, would carry more weight over that runway than anyone else standing within a mile of it, tour guide included. She'd earned the position the hard way, finishing at the top of her flight training class, logging hundreds of carrier landings herself before ever being trusted to grade someone else's, and building a reputation for a calm, exacting eye that senior pilots twice her age had learned not to argue with. None of that showed up in her posture, standing near the runway with a clipboard, and she'd stopped expecting it to a long time ago. The radio crackled to life a few minutes later, the first of 3 F-18s, calling in on approach for a carrier qualification landing pattern, a demanding sequence of touch-and-go landings designed to simulate the exact precision required to land safely on a moving carrier deck. Zoe raised her handheld radio, her focus narrowing entirely onto the aircraft, descending toward the runway. "Navy 214, you're cleared for the pattern," she said, her voice even and unhurried. "Call the ball." The pilot, a young lieutenant named Marcus Halloway on his first qualification cycle, responded crisply, and his first 2 passes came in clean, exactly on glide slope, textbook touch-and-goes that drew a small round of applause from the watching tour group, none of whom understood they were watching anything more technical than an impressive flyby. Zoe tracked every detail of those first 2 passes with total concentration, watching angle of approach, airspeed, and the precise timing of each touchdown, her clipboard filling with the shorthand notation she'd use later in his formal debrief. Frank Dolan, still narrating for his tour group nearby, offered his own casual commentary. "Looks pretty easy from up here, doesn't it, folks?" These pilots make it look simple. It wasn't simple, and Zoe knew exactly how far from simple the next several minutes were about to become. On his third approach, Marcus's aircraft came in low, drifting slightly off the center line in a way that would have looked, to an untrained eye, like nothing more than a minor wobble. Zoe's expression sharpened instantly, her eyes locked on the descending jet, calculating glide slope and closure rate with the same instant precision she'd trained into herself over years of exactly this kind of split-second judgment. "Navy 214, you're low and drifting left," she said into the radio, her voice still even, but carrying an edge of clear, immediate authority. "Power up, bolter, bolter, bolter." The command came out clean and absolute, no hesitation in it at all, and Marcus responded instantly, pushing his throttles forward and climbing away from the runway instead of completing the landing, the aircraft roaring back into the sky in a controlled, powered climb out exactly as trained. A ripple of confused murmurs passed through the tour group, several of them glancing toward Frank, uncertain whether what they'd just watched was part of the show or something that had actually gone wrong. Frank himself had gone quiet, his easy narration momentarily replaced by genuine uncertainty. Zoe kept her focus entirely on the aircraft as it climbed back into the pattern, her voice steady over the radio. "Navy 214, good power, reset for another approach. You had good judgment holding that power through the correction." "Copy, ma'am," Marcus answered, his voice carrying the particular tightness of a pilot who knew exactly how close that pass had come to becoming a problem far more serious than a wave-off. Zoe lowered her radio for a brief moment and glanced toward the tour group without quite making eye contact with anyone specific, aware, in the periphery of her focus, that Frank's earlier commentary had gone conspicuously silent. She didn't say anything. She simply raised the radio again as Marcus's aircraft turned back onto approach for his fourth attempt. This time, the pass came in clean, corrected, exactly on centerline, the kind of disciplined recovery that separated pilots who could take a hard correction and apply it immediately from pilots who couldn't. Zoe watched every second of it with the same unwavering focus. "Navy 214, that's a good pass. Cleared to land, full stop." The remaining two aircraft completed their qualification patterns without incident over the next several minutes, each pilot calling the ball, each pass tracked, and graded with the same exacting precision Zoe had applied to every single approach that afternoon. When the third jet rolled to a stop on the tarmac, all three pilots climbed down from their cockpits and began walking toward the debrief area, passing directly by the spot where Zoe stood with her clipboard, and directly past the tour group still gathered along the viewing path. Marcus reached her first, pulling off his helmet, his expression carrying the specific mixture of exhaustion and gratitude particular to a pilot who'd just been saved from a mistake by someone paying closer attention than he had been. He came to a stop in front of her and offered a crisp, respectful nod. "Commander," he said, "thank you for catching that. I didn't feel the drift until you called it. That wave-off probably saved me a hard landing, maybe worse. You corrected fast once I called it," Zoe said simply. "That's what matters. Good flying on the reset." The other two pilots offered their own respectful acknowledgments as they passed, one of them calling her ma'am with the kind of easy familiarity that told the tour group, in an instant, exactly what kind of authority they'd been watching without realizing it. Frank Dolan stood frozen near the edge of his own tour group, the color slowly draining from his face as three fighter pilots addressed the woman he'd dismissed 20 minutes earlier as somebody's girlfriend tagging along for the view. A woman in the group turned toward him, eyebrows raised. "Did that pilot just call her commander?" Frank didn't answer right away. He simply watched Zoe make a final note on her clipboard and turned to walk toward the debrief building, her earlier smile still faintly present, unbothered, exactly the way it had been 20 minutes earlier. Frank approached her hesitantly before she reached the door, his easy tour guide confidence noticeably absent now. "Ma'am, Commander, I'm sorry. What I said earlier, about you being somebody's girlfriend, that was out of line." Zoe turned toward him, no anger in her expression, just the same steady calm she'd carried through the entire afternoon. "You made a quick assumption. People do that when they're not really looking. I'd just ask you to look a little longer next time, before deciding what someone's job actually is." He nodded, clearly rattled, and didn't try to say much more than that, which Zoe appreciated more than a longer, more elaborate apology would have earned from him. She'd learned a long time ago that the shortest apologies tended to be the most honest ones. I spoke with Commander Bennett sometime after that afternoon, and I asked her what she remembered most clearly about it. She said it wasn't the wave-off, and it wasn't the apology. It was the 4 minutes before any of it happened, standing near that runway, listening to a stranger guess wrong about her out loud, and choosing to smile instead of correcting him, because she'd already decided a long time ago that her job would do the correcting for her, every single time, without her ever needing to raise her voice first. She told me something else, too, something she said to every young pilot she trained afterward. She said the people who laugh the loudest at the start rarely stick around to watch the landing, and that the only opinion that ever really mattered belonged to the person standing there with the authority to make the call, whether or not the crowd behind her had figured that out yet. At 35,000 feet, or 50 feet above a runway watching a jet come in too low, it's never about how young you look holding the radio. It's about whether you're willing to make the hard call the second it's needed. Now here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea what you were actually capable of until the moment finally proved them wrong? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and some of the best stories on this channel started exactly there. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. Thanks for flying with me tonight. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you on the next flight.